Okay, what role will commercialization play in the next 10 years, according to you?
Well, I think it's already playing this role in Europe, indeed. And I think there's quite a few institutional changes that we are seeing, experiencing in some MFIs. As I said before, Eastern European countries, probably the commercialization has already gone through and probably finished the process. In Western European countries, we will see that probably the shareholder composition will be rather different in the next few years, which that will imply to put some more pressure for commercialization for MFIs that are currently more socially or strongly socially oriented. In that case, I think results should be positive. We are seeing the evolution in the sector. Sector keeps growing every year, but there's been like a consolidation process in countries in which you found before 7, 8 MFIs. Now you find one national champion, or maybe there is a place for 2, which become much more effective and efficient, economically efficient. Which can cover almost the national market. Whether they do it effectively or not is another question, and if there's space for any other MFIs. But I think the process of efficiency, economically efficiency and economic sense for these MFIs, is going to be very important for the sector, actually, for the sustainability of the entire sector, and having a presence of a microcredit sector in Europe, as we understand microcredit now in the sector. We'll see what microcredit becomes in 10 years. Probably we'll talk about social finance, something more generic. But per se, I think commercialization will be the key for the survival of the sector in the future.
Okay. So, Daniel, let's get back to the South. So commercialization has already happened in the South, in developing countries, isn't it? But what are the expected outcomes of this commercialization trend, according to you, in the next 10 years also?
So I would think there are a couple of potential outcomes that we can expect. One is institutions that basically stop being microfinance, that become normalized, that just are financial institutions on their own. This is the financial inclusion, the sort of, you can think of it as the end target of the financial inclusion objective, right? Because you don't necessarily want to have financial services from a microfinance institution, you just want financial services. To the extent financial institutions evolve, microfinance institutions evolve to become more normal parts of the financial sector, and a financial sector that is targeting the broad mass of the people, then that's success. And I think we're already seeing this in some countries, especially the more developed ones like Peru. On the other hand, you probably will have some institutions that continue to specialize and continue to serve the relatively narrow niche needs of microenterprise development, social development, maybe be it agriculture or other segments. And they, in some sense, might actually look a bit more like the types of microfinance institutions that Jorge described, especially in Western Europe, where you're talking about institutions that remain relatively small, that target the narrow audience, that have a very specific approach. And they may be commercial or they may not be commercial. It depends, but they will definitely be very different types of institutions, where they're not driven by volume, but actually driven by the focus on the objective. There are some additional outcomes which I think, if we look 10 years ahead, might be a little bit less positive, especially on savings. I don't see broad trends of high outreach for savings clients really anywhere, maybe with some exception of Bangladesh and Indonesia, because small savings clients are not very profitable. And so institutions, even institutions that do savings, don't tend to target them a lot. And I think this is one place where strict commercialization doesn't help a whole lot, and it will require a different type of approach.
Would you have any reaction on this commercialization trend with this perspective from the North?
Well, I would say that it's not only positive, but even in some cases, I think commercialization is necessary in order for the MFIs as projects themselves to become self-sustainable, and in the end to have a bigger impact on the main target, which is in the end financial inclusion, as most of the MFIs in Europe say. Curiously, in Europe we have all the entire spectrum from MFIs in Western European countries that are more socially oriented with NGO foundation-based institutional organizations towards more Central European and Eastern European countries in which you see a much bigger degree of commercialization. Even some MFIs, indeed, they transform themselves into banks. I think our main target would be to try to look at closely how is the process of commercialization, because indeed per se I don't think it's negative. I think it's positive indeed, but whether this process makes the MFI actually to get off from the initial target on addressing underserved people, this is what we need to look at. But per se, I think many MFIs and many younger MFIs in Western European countries that are actually doing big efforts in terms of bigger outreach, bigger number of clients, increasing portfolio quite noticeably every year. We see that at some point probably they will need to reach into a certain level of commercialization that must be very interesting. So we are living quite an interesting process in Europe.
Okay. Daniel, I mean, let's get back to the SOAT. We've seen an evolution in the mission statements of many microfinance institutions. I mean, it was originally poverty reduction, it's frequently now financial inclusion. Is it a positive development according to you?
I would say yes, it's both a positive development. It's been a necessary development, and I think at the same time it has real negative side effects as well that we should be aware of. On the positive side, if you look at a mission of financial inclusion, that means reaching a broad segment of people who don't have financial access. And if you look at most countries where microfinance sectors are developed, like Peru or Cambodia, what you will see is 10 years ago, 15 years ago, these markets had excluded the vast majority of the population. And in fact, banks were only serving a relatively thin slice at the top. It is only through commercialization and through the access to large amounts of capital that microfinance institutions have been able to reach this broad segment of people. That has come at the expense of sometimes losing focus on the original intent of microfinance, which is micro-enterprise development, which is quite a narrow scope. It requires a very focused approach, and some MFIs continue to do it. Some have abandoned it for the large part. There are also those who have remained specialized in that area and have essentially not gone the full commercialization route. So we see a spectrum, much as Jorge has said, but a spectrum that has happened over, in the past rather than happening now.
Okay, thank you.